Evolve is a game that some of you may have forgotten about because it came out almost 10 years ago. Some of you may be thinking, why should I even care about the shitterbox of a game that didn't even last for 4 years? Evolve is a game that had enormous potential. It was barely just ahead of its time, and it was demolished by typical corporate suit schmuckery. For years, the thought of Evolve releasing in today's gaming market has surfaced over and over again in my brain. How would it have performed today? How did it fall flat in its face in the first place? And why should it get a redo? These are the questions that I'll be answering today, and of course, if you enjoy this video, please make sure to like and subscribe. Please do it, I'm begging you. Let me take you back to February 2015. Evolve launches after months and months of huge hype buildup and was easily one of the most anticipated games of the year. The surface level concept of this game was easily a slam dunk. The original creators of Left 4 Dead created a 4-player co-op first-person shooter where they hunt down a 5th player that is controlling a monster. At the time, this genre of game was almost unheard of. The technical name for this genre is asymmetric multiplayer, meaning that you have players controlling at least 2 or more different groups with different gameplay mechanics and objectives. You could also think of it as Predator versus Prey or hide and seek or Juggernaut or whatever tickles your pickle. This genre was almost non-existent back in 2015. So the idea on paper sounded incredible. And the game actually launched with very good sales, but was quickly met with tons of backlash due to the crazy amount of DLC and the stupid long progression grind. Evolve launched with over 40 different DLC packs, which is just absolutely insane. Keep in mind that back in 2015, this was right around the peak of when DLC was at its craziest point ever, and every game under the sun was trying to find as many ways possible to just absolutely fucking jam DLC down your throat. But 40 DLC packs at launch? On top of the fact that this game was full price too, not free to play, absolutely criminal, and probably the worst sales strategy of all time. In their minds, they were just following the trends of the time. However, if they would have taken 2 seconds to read the room, they would have realized 2 things. One, that people hated how toxic DLC was at the time, and sure as shit did not want to pay for a bunch of content that should have just been content that was included with the full price $60 game that they just purchased. And 2, nobody was going to buy your DLC or play your game because everything is locked behind a fucking paywall. If you actually wanted to buy the game and all the day 1 DLC available, it would have cost you close to $200 to do so. Yes, you heard that right. $200 on day 1. I hope that every corporate scumbag that was in the position to make that decision is no longer making those decisions anymore. I mean, what in the actual fuck? These guys just gave us a free masterclass on how to fuck a franchise sideways on day 1. Like, how did nobody see this shit plan and say, this might not be a great idea? This is the primary reason why this game exploded like a hot, shitty, smelly dumpster fire. But that wasn't the only reason. The progression in this game was absolutely atrocious. It would take you hours and hours just to level up your hunter or your monster, and it was just absolutely unrealistic. Both of these elements combined crushed the game's player base almost instantly, and this is the part that is so frustrating. The gameplay at its core was actually good. The dynamic worked really well between the 4-player hunters and the solo player monster. The game was definitely not perfect, but with some more updates and fine-tuning, it 100% could have become a super fun and unique experience. Even still today, there are not many games like this at all, which brings me to my next point. Like I just mentioned a second ago, there are still not many games today that fall under the asymmetric multiplayer genre. A really popular one that you might not think of at first is Among Us. This tiny game made by just a few people took over the world and made a crazy amount of money. But this other example is a game that actually only came out a year after Evolve, and it is still alive and well today. That game is Dead by Daylight. In my opinion, the fact that Dead by Daylight is still around today is honestly pretty shocking considering it was released all the way back in 2016. I think the reason that it is still around today is due to the fact that they didn't make some of the same colossal errors that Evolve did. However, they still made some really interesting decisions. For example, currently on the Steam page, there are 31 different DLC packs available for the game, and it would cost you about $253 to buy them all. So obviously, this is very similar to Evolve in that sense, which is very interesting because people don't really seem to care. I think that the main difference here is the fact that the DLC for Dead by Daylight has been slowly released over 8 years versus the 40 dropped at launch for Evolve. Also, Dead by Daylight has a much cheaper barrier to entry than Evolve did, which I think is one of the main reasons why this game has survived. It's been on Xbox Game Pass for years, and it has free play weekends every now and then. And on top of that, the base game is only $20, and it seems to go on sale a good amount as well. I tried reading the reviews to see why people enjoyed the game, but that was a little bit of a shit show to say the least. But taking all this info into account after looking at the reviews, the game has survived because 1, the asymmetric multiplayer plus horror combo is a very unique genre, and the gameplay / progression is pretty straightforward for new players to hop in. 2, it has a very dedicated niche fan base that puts tons of hours into the game, which helps keeps it alive and keeps content coming in. And 3, the cheap barrier to entry brings people in, which sort of cancels out the expensive DLC. I think the game would really benefit if it offered the DLC content in a different way. I'm not going to dive into it, but that's just a lot of DLC, which is not cheap for a game that is not free to play. I guess free to play if you're on Game Pass. So after looking at all of that info on Dead by Daylight, I think Evolve could have easily performed well today and could have sustained long-term success if it would have just nailed down a smarter choice for the DLC. I know the battle passes weren't really a big thing yet back in 2015, and with some people that term might be triggering, but I think it's actually been executed pretty well recently with a lot of games, and it's a very solid plan for any game that is planning on releasing a lot of post-launch multiplayer content. So that is of course one option, and the other option would be to simply drop the game for a full price $60 and then slowly release the content for free every few months or each new season. Either option would have worked way better than the atrocious plan that they went with, because you just can't try and do both strategies. You cannot have your game include a hefty price tag and also charge people for a shitload of DLCs as well. It's way too expensive, unrealistic, and ultimately just pisses everybody off because everything is locked behind a paywall for a game that they have already paid for. And at that point, it just comes down to user preference. For example, Grand Theft Auto 5 is a game that has treated its multiplayer very well, providing constant free updates to a game that has lasted for over a decade now. On the other hand, free-to-play games with battle passes can be great because they allow you to hop in for free whenever you feel like it, and you always have the option to pay for extra content if you want to, but it's not required. Of course, with either option, the base gameplay and progression has to be solid or else it will flop either way. But as long as you clearly define how people will be paying for the content rather than trying to charge them for everything, it will work. The hype was clearly there for Evolve when it first released. Just a couple months after launch, the game already sold 2.5 million copies, even with all of the very loud DLC backlash. Evolve even gained 1 million new PC players when they switched over to the free-to-play model a year and a half after launch. But this didn't work out long term because most of the content was still locked behind paid DLCs, and the progression was just still garbage. So why should Evolve get a redo, a do-over, a mulligan? Well, obviously we aren't going to get an actual sequel to Evolve because there's just no way in hell the developer Turtle Rock Studios is going to touch that shit show again, especially after the disaster they just had a few years ago with Back 4 Blood. Man, talk about fuck up after fuck up. Back 4 Blood should have been a slam dunk, but that's a topic for another video. Actually, comment down below if you want to see a video like this comparing Back 4 Blood to Left 4 Dead. Anyway, so since there's pretty much a 0% chance of a real sequel happening, what I mean is that some other studio would be really fucking smart if they decided to do their own take on Evolve. Essentially make their own sequel, avoiding all of the easily avoidable colossal fuck-ups that Evolve made. Because like I mentioned, clearly the hype is there. Gameplay was interesting and unique. The genre of asymmetric multiplayer is still rare, and clearly there's an audience for it. No other game can scratch the same itch that Evolve brought to the table. The concept of 4 players working in unison to hunt down an extremely powerful monster who's controlled by another player is just an idea that works. At any moment, the 4 hunters can become the hunted if they are not extremely careful and strategic with their offensive. This dynamic is what makes the idea unique, because normally there's one side that is much more overpowered than the other. However, in Evolve, I think that this is what makes it so different from other games. Both sides can become the predator or prey at any given moment, and this is something that is just not often attempted in multiplayer games, especially with asymmetric multiplayer. I think if a studio were to redo Evolve today, it would have much more success simply due to the fact that live service games are pretty much the industry standard these days. For example, let's just say that Evolve 2.0 released today as free-to-play games, seasonal updates that provided new free maps, new modes, and new battle passes with each season. Assuming that the gameplay and the progression was sound, this model would be something that new players could easily pick up whenever they chose to, and it would provide the constantly dedicated players with fresh new content and progression every season. Each new battle pass could provide the typical content such as new playable monsters, hunters, weapons, and cosmetics. This would easily work so well, I don't know why it hasn't been done already. And on top of that, you could do special raid events or even a whole other dedicated game mode to some sort of raid that was a large scale multiple map stage survival mode. So clearly there are no shortage of ideas on how you could monetize and support this game long term with today's industry standards. And what's funny is that not only would this method generate a shit ton of money, but it also wouldn't piss off the fan base. So there you go, you corporate schmucks. Again though, this is all obviously dependent on the gameplay and progression being very sound and balanced. I really hope that we do see a studio soon make their own proper version of Evolve, because clearly it would just work. The concept is fantastic and the gameplay is unique, but it just needs the right execution. So hopefully this happens one day, because I think that would be pretty damn cool. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe. It would really help me out a ton and I would greatly appreciate it. Of course, if you made it all the way to the end of the video, you are awesome. Thank you so much. Comment down below other games that you think should get a redo or maybe even a sequel that hasn't happened yet. Thanks again for watching and I hope that you have a good one.